Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, good afternoon again. I declare open the fourth meeting and last meeting for today. The meeting is the presentation of the outcome reports of the distinguished delegations of the Republic of Korea and the distinguished delegation of China. First, let me invite the delegation of the Republic of Korea to present their outcome report. I have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Kim Ji-hyun, Deputy Head of Delegation of the Republic of Korea, for her final remarks. Excellency, you have the floor.
Greetings, honorable chairs and distinguished delegates. On behalf of all the delegates of ROK, the Deputy Head of Delegation would now like to introduce the final outcome report based on the session that has been previously conducted. Starting with the first agenda of freedom of opinion and expression. Republic of Korea has been urged by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the promotion and the protection of the rights of freedom of opinion and expression, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, Human Rights Committee, and many non-governmental organizations to abolish substantially and also substantially amend the national security law in order to bring it into line with international legal standards. In compliance with the recommendations and/or conclusions, along its voluntary commitments and its replies presented during the interactive session, specific modalities and its replies an implementation or amendment for the following will be made. The national security law, the criminal defamation law, restrictions on women's reproductive rights, and sex education in schools. Moving on to the second agenda of human trafficking. As the Republic of Korea attaches great importance to eliminating the international crime of human trafficking, the government has taken recommendations raised by other states into serious consideration. Concerted efforts of governmental agencies in preventing, prosecuting, and protecting will continue in its instituting measures, such as victim education and support, operation of hotlines, law enforcement officer training, and distribution of national plan of action that outlines the response materials for various industries. ROK approaches this problem as both a country of origin and destination, as it is the continued process of constructing a tighter safety net for victims and a wider parameter for acts punishable under the criminal code of human trafficking, along with harsher sentences. Moving on to the next agenda of right of the children. The ROK recognizes that universal birth registration could protect the unregistered children living in the state. As several concerns do exist, the ROK would like to take careful steps in implementing the universal birth registration. We'll gradually move on to the level of UBR, like keep implementing several complementary measures mentioned in the former national reports in order to minimize any side effect that could happen. The RK will keep amending the former national report. The RK will keep amending the Student Human Rights Act and also utilize the Child Youth Rights Division and the Committee on the Rights of the Children under the NHRCK in order to eradicate the corporal punishment. The Act will also be conducive in alleviating academic pressure and combating discrimination against the disabled students. Moving on to the agenda of the environment. RK has been questioned for their efforts during the interactive dialogue for human rights of environmentally sound management and disposal of hazardous substances and waste by the UN Special Rapporteur. In accordance to the recommendations and conclusions provided, the government of RK would like to assure of its continued support for the Special Rapporteur of his mandate in order to protect different stakeholders ranging from consumers, workers, children, and also communities. In order to incorporate a right to healthy environment in their constitutions, RK will ensure the government's efforts into introducing the approval and genuine authorization of the systems for biocidal substances and also the products that it's in regard, so that only the safe products will be placed on the market for the sake of not only the sustainable environment, but also for the sake of consumers. Last but not least, gender equality and violence. RK accepts to increase the actual law effectiveness by strengthening its policies regarding gender equality and gender inequality and violence. It will continue to ensure great representation of women in the workplace through the affirmative action and revising the Act on Equal Employment to prevent career breaks. In order to enhance women employment, including the older generation, the government is running offline and online centers for support. Moreover, the government will continue to monitor gender wage gap problems with honorary inspectors from the government. Regarding sexual violence, the government will initiate new bills to cope with various types of sexual violence, including hidden camera crimes as discussed, and also the dating violence. Lastly, ROK will lead cooperation of ministries dealing not only with gender inequality and violence, but also human trafficking, and come up with fruitful measures in migrants' brides' rights. Thank you.
Thanks again to the Deputy Head of Delegation of the Republic of Korea, Her Excellency Ms. Kim Ji-hyun, for presenting the outcome report of the Republic of Korea. I now propose that the Human Rights Council adopts the outcome report of the UPR of the Republic of Korea as it has been proposed. I see no objection. The report is adopted. Now let me proceed with the second delegation, the delegation of China.
Thank you.
I now have the honor to invite Her Excellency Ms. Yi Yu, Deputy Head of the Delegation of China, to introduce the outcome report of the UPR of China. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. The Chinese delegation would like to thank the Chair and the delegations of respective states in engaging in fruitful interactive dialogue with China for the safeguarding and protection of human rights. China views the preservation of respect for human rights as vital for the future prosperity of the nation, and shall work with the international community towards the cause. For freedom of opinion and expression, the Chinese government aims at filtering harmful content on the internet for the purpose of developing healthy and positive platforms as well as to uphold the national security. Although China has yet to rectify the ICCPR, the government values freedom of speech and expression and respects the right of its citizens to express their opinion in a responsible manner and in accordance with the Chinese laws. The OCCAC shall make sure that the content is to be filtered when necessary in order to avoid limiting unreasonable freedom of speech in the country. Therefore, the work of monitoring internet content is to be done carefully and appropriately so that the internet continues to be the tool for Chinese citizens to raise their voices. The Chinese government recognizes that progress is needed regarding people's rights to political participation in China, and the government is actively working on progression of recognizing the stakeholders and providing such rights. China will actively review on its detention laws, such as that there is no violation of the rights of detainees. NGOs within the border shall abide by the law, such as the Chinese government can recognize their status. Nevertheless, the international society must recognize that China has its own norms and goals in democracy, and that China is working on a progression to promote freedom of opinion and expression that fits Chinese context and international standards. For human trafficking, a working mechanism against violence to children for the purpose of prevention, monitoring, reporting, investigation, evaluation, and handling cases of violence to children shall be put in place to provide necessary assistance. China shall work on improving labor, security supervision, and law enforcement system and labor dispute settlement mechanism. The state shall strictly prohibit employment discrimination of any form, including that of migrant workers. Further protection shall be given to migrant workers and for the prevention of human trafficking by coerced labor. The amendment to the criminal law for the prohibition against buying and trafficking of women and children shall apply continually. Cross-border cooperation shall continue between China and states to which China has made prior agreements with. The Chinese government acknowledges the phenomenon with trafficked North Korean refugees and shall implement appropriate action towards the problem in accordance to the principles in the China Action Plan Against the Trafficking of Persons 2013 to 2020. Regarding to rights of children, in response to the delegation of Vietnam, the Chinese government has passed laws to ensure local governments provide compulsory education for 9 years for all children, especially those with disabilities, from rural areas and children of migrants, reinforcing our citizens' right to education as embodied in the Chinese Constitution. China noted Vietnam's delegation's invitation to collaborate on the problem of child rights. In response to the delegation of South Africa, China plans to advance reform of its household registration system to make basic public services equally accessible to all, and to encourage more rural people to merge into urban life in order to realize SDG 10, reducing inequalities. This would help tackle the situation of children, of migrant workers and minorities, from inadequate access to mainstream education facilities. China noted South Africa's recommendation on increasing awareness on respecting the inherent right to life of children according to the Convention of Rights of Children within the PRC constitutional framework. In response to the delegation of the Philippines, the Chinese government acknowledges the importance of optimizing the allocation of health resources, including appropriation in maternal and child care in rural areas, and promoting equity and accessibility of basic medical and health services for children in order to provide sufficient health services to victims of large-scale pollution. China reiterates its laws on protection of child labor. Regarding to climate change and environment, in June 2018, China published the 2018 Guideline on Environmental Protection and wins the battle against pollution of air, water and soil, and reached targets expected to be achieved by 2020. This shows significant indication of China's determination to address environmental issues. Thank you.
Let me thank once again the Deputy Head of the Delegation of China, Her Excellency Ms. Yi Yu, for her final remarks. I now propose that the Human Rights Council adopts the outcome report of the new PR of China as it has been presented. I see no objection. The report is adopted. This concludes the presentation and adoption of the outcome reports of the UPR of the Republic of Korea and that of China. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Registration begins at 9:30 to proceed with the review of Japan in the morning and the review of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, in the afternoon. The meeting is closed. Thank you.